Chapter 1. The arrival of the crimson Domino, Hercule Poirot, sat in his comfortable armchair beside the window of his Baker Street flat, his little grey cells momentarily at rest. Outside, a foggy April afternoon shrouded London in its usual veil of mystery. Poirot's impeccable moustaches twitched ever so slightly as he sipped his chocolate in silence, enjoying the rare interlude of calm. His morning's correspondence, a handful of invitations, the latest issue of Le Monde Illustré, and 2 letters from Hastings had all been duly noted, but nothing suggested that the tranquillity of the day would last. Just then, a discreet knock sounded at the door. Poirot rose, folded his handkerchief with methodical precision, and called, "Entrez, s'il vous plaît." A uniformed messenger entered, bearing a small black box tied with crimson ribbon. "A most curious parcel, monsieur," said the young man, handing it over. "No return address, sir." Poirot examined the box with mild interest. He ran a finger along the ribbon, noting with satisfaction the perfect symmetry of the bow. "Merci, mon ami," he said, placing the parcel on his desk. The messenger bowed and departed, leaving behind an air of intrigue. Poirot turned the box in his hands, observing its unadorned silk surface. No markings, no wax seal, nothing but the stark contrast of black and crimson. "Ah, mon Dieu," murmured Poirot, "a mystery already." He fetched his penknife, sliced through the ribbon, and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay a single domino, ebony in colour, but for one tile painted a deep blood red. Beneath it lay a folded note, penned in elegant, looping script. Poirot unfolded the paper and read aloud. "Monsieur Poirot, if you wish to prevent a tragedy, bring your little grey cells to Greystone Manor at midnight on the morrow. There you will find the secret of the crimson domino. Fail, and 1 life will be forfeit." A friend of Justice Poirot's eyebrows rose. A midnight summons, a blood-red domino, a veiled threat, perfect fodder for a night's entertainment. He set the note aside and studied the domino itself. The black tile was glossy. The red surface bore no smudges, no fingerprints. A fresh object, expertly painted. Poirot placed it on a sheet of blotting paper and regarded it like a detective inspecting a clue at a crime scene. Still, he needed context. He rang the bell and instructed his steward, Jean-Louis, to procure a hansom cab and to ready his travelling cloak and hat. "Jean-Louis, I depart this evening for Greystone Manor. Engage the driver to wait at 10:30. Jean-Louis nodded, accustomed to such sudden excursions. Poirot then poured himself another cup of chocolate and settled back to reflect. Greystone Manor. He recalled the name. An Elizabethan mansion converted into a school of horticulture some years ago, now belonging to Lady Arabella Greystone and her extended family, a remote estate in Surrey, famed for its topiary gardens, and but perhaps now the locus of darker affairs. He considered the note's final line, "A friend of justice." Poirot's mind raced over possible senders. A disgruntled heir, a wronged spouse, someone with a flair for the dramatic. Nothing made immediate sense. No family member of Lady Greystone had ever troubled Poirot, and yet the tone hinted at moral outrage. Justice must be served. By 6 o'clock, Hastings arrived, cheerfully unaware of anything beyond his afternoon tea. Mon ami, you look animated, something new. Poirot gestured to the black box. Behold, a midnight invitation to Greystone Manor, accompanied by this curious token. He tilted the domino for Hastings to see. The younger man examined it with frank curiosity. Well, that's not something you see every day. A crimson domino. Why that, I wonder? Exactly, Hastings. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A puzzle. The red tile surely symbolizes blood, danger, perhaps a life at stake. But why a domino? A game piece, a message hidden in play. He drummed his fingertips on the desk. Nevertheless, the invitation stands. We must go. Hastings, whose appetite for adventure never waned, clapped his hands. Marvellous! A late-night trip to the country, just the thing for a little excitement. Shall I pack my tweeds? Oui, Hastings, but pack lightly. We shall return by dawn, I trust. As evening deepened, Poirot donned his black overcoat and top hat, placed the crimson ribbon in a pocket, and bade Jean-Louis good night. The hansom cab was waiting outside. In the back seat, Poirot reclined, surveying the lamp-lit streets as they passed. The carriage clip-clopped northwards through cobbled lanes, then swung west onto Marylebone Road and towards the train station. At Paddington, they boarded a late service to Woking. The platform was deserted, save for a porter yawning by a luggage cart. Hastings carried their single trunk. Poirot reserved a first-class compartment, where he immediately arranged his silk-lined cloak and folded his legs with precision. They settled in. Hastings reading a newspaper, Poirot studying the domino. Shortly after 10, the train hissed to a halt at Woking. A waiting motor car, an estate livery, stood idling under a gas lamp. Poirot and Hastings climbed in. The driver, expressionless, helped with their luggage, but offered no greeting. The road to Greystone Manor wound through moonlit fields and wooded lanes. An owl hooted. The signposts passed. Greystone Manor, 3 miles. The manor loomed at the crest of a hill, a silhouette of towers and battlements against a cloudless sky. A single carriage lantern glowed by the front door. Poirot stepped down, paid the driver, and advanced across the gravel drive. Hastings followed. His heart quickened. The air smelled of dew and wisteria. They entered a broad hall lined with portraits of stern ancestors. At the foot of a grand staircase, Lady Arabella Greystone awaited them, wrapped in a velvet shawl. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed. Her grey eyes held a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," she said, her voice calm yet strained. "I scarcely know why I invited you until tonight." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the pleasure and privilege is mine. Might I ask why I was summoned by such an unusual method?" Lady Greystone exchanged a glance with an elderly butler at her side, Mr. Fordham. "It began this afternoon," she explained. "My nephew Edward discovered in his study a box, much like yours. Inside was a domino, painted blood red on one side with no message. No one knows who left it. Soon after, my goddaughter, Miss Margaret Fanshawe, found an identical domino at the foot of her bed. 2 crimson dominoes. Excellent, excellent," murmured Poirot. "And do you suspect a prank, madame?" "I hoped so," she said, "but then my niece Isabel received hers by post with a note. One more arrives at midnight. Only the wise will survive. After that, I feared for their safety. I remembered you, monsieur, and begged you to come. Poirot studied the faces around him. Edward, a tall young man with anxious eyes. Margaret, fair-haired, fragile. Isabel, dark and wilful. All seemed tense, their breaths visible in the chill corridor. Poirot's own expression remained inscrutable, but within, his mind danced. "You have done well to summon me," he said, quietly. "But I must examine the scene of the first delivery. Where is Edward's study?" Lady Greystone gestured upstairs. "Second floor, end of the east wing. But please be cautious. My family is on edge." "Yes, madame." Poirot's voice was gentle. "You shall have my utmost discretion." He and Hastings ascended the staircase. At the study door, a lamp glowed behind frosted glass. Poirot paused, placed a hand on the doorknob, and inhaled the faint scent of tobacco and cedar. He entered, trailing Hastings. The study was richly appointed. Mahogany desk, bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, the family crest embroidered on a tapestry. On the writing surface lay the ebony and crimson domino, perched on a blotter. No other items disturbed. Poirot approached. He knelt, picked up the tile with gloved fingertips, and examined its edges. "Notice, Hastings," he said, "the crispness of the paint, the absence of dust. A carefully crafted object, placed here deliberately, yet quickly retrieved. The sender wished us to see it." He placed the domino in an evidence bag, a small silk pouch from his pocket. "And here, Hastings," he added, pointing to the window ledge, "I see a smear of soil. Someone must have climbed through or reached in. The mud matches the gravel outside." Hastings frowned. So the deliverer came through the window, in full view of the grounds. Indeed, a bold individual, or someone confident of solitude. But note, there are no footprints on the gravel. The soil on the ledge is new. This suggests a slippered foot, perhaps a woman, or the careful stepping of gloves. We must consider every possibility. He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and surveyed the room. "This is but a beginning. At midnight we expect the third domino. We must guard the recipients and uncover the motive behind these warnings." Hastings glanced at the clock. "Only 20 minutes to midnight, Poirot. We should warn Margaret and Isabel." "Precisely." Poirot laid a calming hand on Hastings's shoulder. "Come, mon ami, the night is far from over, and our little grey cells must now be at their keenest." Together they left the study, the crimson domino pouch in Poirot's hand, and anticipation on their minds. Outside, the grandfather clock in the hall tolled 11:40. The game had begun. Tomorrow, or perhaps tonight, would reveal whether justice, so fervently invoked, would indeed be served, or whether tragedy would strike beneath the shadow of the crimson domino. Chapter 2. The Watchers in the Shadows. A low wind whispered through the ancient oaks that flanked the east wing of Greystone Manor, stirring loose leaves across the gravel courtyard. Inside, the heavy windows of Edward Greystone's study remained shuttered against the night, but the grey-tinged moonlight slanted across the hallway, illuminating the faces of Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings as they closed the door behind them. Lady Arabella Greystone waited at the foot of the grand staircase, her shawl drawn snugly about her shoulders, Mr. Fordham standing discreetly behind. Margaret Fanshawe and Isabel Greystone flanked their aunt, eyes wide with apprehension. "Madam," Poirot began, "we have secured the first target, Edward's study. Now we must ensure the safety of your other family members. I propose that you remain with your niece and goddaughter in a single room, under guard, until dawn." He produced the silk pouch containing the black and crimson domino and showed it respectfully to Lady Greystone before tucking it into his pocket. Lady Greystone nodded, her expression resolute. "Yes, of course. Follow me to the guest suite on the south side. It has 3 adjoining chambers. We will lock every door." She led the way, descending the staircase with measured steps. Hastings followed Poirot, while Fordham hovered behind, his posture stiff with duty. The guest suite was a cluster of 3 rooms, each with a carved oak door and heavy drapes. Oil lamps burned at the walls. Hastings assisted Mr. Fordham in barricading the outer door with a bar, while Poirot instructed Margaret and Isabel to enter the central chamber together. Lady Greystone took the western room, and a maid, Mrs. Whittaker, volunteered to hold the eastern chamber. A lantern stood on a small table in the hallway. When all was secure, Poirot surveyed the trio. "My friends," he said gently, "I ask you to remain calm. There will be no further deliveries without warning. I intend to station Captain Hastings here as guard, and I shall patrol the corridors myself." He offered his hand to Margaret, who gave it a trembling shake. Isabel, more composed, simply inclined her head. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," Isabel said. "But what, in heaven's name, does this all mean? What have we done to deserve the crimson domino?" Her tone mixed curiosity with indignation. "Patience, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "We must discover the motive before we can understand the method. At midnight, the sender threatened a 3rd domino. You have heard the note. Only the wise will survive. I distrust the words, but they contain a clue. Something about wisdom. Perhaps an academic riddle. Perhaps a cipher." Margaret whimpered. "But what riddle? What cipher? It's torture." She sank onto a chaise lounge, wringing her hands. "Indeed," Poirot agreed, "but fear not. I shall solve this puzzle. Captain Hastings, remain outside these doors. Should any sound reach you, ring once. Do you understand?" "Right you are," Hastings answered crisply, drawing his revolver from an inside pocket. He propped himself against the wall, lantern at his side, vigilant. Poirot bowed, then turned to Lady Greystone. "Madam, I request that you remain here with your niece and goddaughter in case the sender seeks audience. I shall take to the corridors." He retrieved a small notebook and pencil from his overcoat. Lady Greystone hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful, monsieur." With that, Poirot stepped into the corridor. The manor's walls were lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow his progress. The hush of midnight pressed in on him, interrupted only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock and the whispering wind outside. He opened his notebook. "Midnight deliveries, Edward's study. Delivered, retrieved. Smear of soil on window. Ledge Margaret's bed. Unknown. Need details. Isabel's letter, received by post. Location unknown." First, Poirot resolved to examine the site of Margaret's encounter. According to Lady Greystone, Margaret had quietly tiptoed into the corridor. after the first domino appeared under her pillow. Guided by Fordham, she had witnessed nothing but empty hallways and the moonlit garden beyond an open casement. Poirot retraced her steps, pausing at each bedroom door. The corridor floor was carpeted in deep burgundy, obscuring footsteps, but along the skirting board he noted a faint scuff of pale green paint. "Aha!" he murmured. Beneath the scuff lay flecks of chipped timber, painted to match the guest suite's wainscoting. He knelt and examined the paint chips with a magnifying lens he produced from his pocket. Distinctive shade, Sherwood green, used only on the entrances to Lady Greystone's private corridor. He pocketed the chips carefully. Next, Poirot continued down the hallway toward the west wing where Isabel's letter had arrived. The postal delivery had come earlier that evening, slipped under the door of her sitting room. He found the door ajar, a faint rustle of paper within. He entered softly. The room was appointed in pale mauve. Upholstered chairs, lace curtains, writing desk. On the blotter lay the matching domino, identical to Edward's. The letter had been removed. No trace remained, except a faint whiff of lavender perfume. Poirot crossed to the desk and held his hand above the blotter, sniffing. Lavender and old parchment, he noted. Certainly feminine. He turned to the window and noted a set of footprints pressed lightly into the dew-slick marble sill. Oddly, the prints were of two different shoe soles, one larger, one smaller, perhaps an adult and a child. He sketched the imprints in his notebook. Suddenly, the grandfather clock chimed midnight, its deep tones reverberating through the corridors. Poirot stiffened. So, he mused aloud, the third domino should arrive shortly. He replaced the magnifying lens, adjusted his cravat, and moved swiftly back towards the guest suite. As he passed the main staircase, he paused. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs, a slender figure gliding downward like mist. Poirot froze. The figure's outline suggested a woman in a flowing gown, a hand clutching something small and rectangular. Without hesitation, Poirot stepped into the faint light cast by a landing lamp and called, "Madam!" The figure hesitated, then turned and fled up the stairs, trailing a glimmer of movement. Poirot gave chase. His footfalls were muffled by the thick runner, but the pursuit was urgent. The figure reached the second-floor corridor and darted into the east wing, where servants' quarters lay. Poirot paused at the servants' hallway junction, catching his breath. No sign of the figure. Remained only the echo of disappearing footsteps. A cry rang out from ahead. Poirot dashed toward the sound, rounding a corner into a small linen closet. There, pressed against the wall in a jumble of sheets, cowered a maid, Miss Parker, her eyes wide. "Mon Dieu, monsieur!" she gasped. I saw her, sir, a lady, pale and tall, carrying something red." She pointed to the hallway. "She went that way." "Thank you, Miss Parker." Poirot patted her gently on the shoulder and stepped out. Hastings stood at the far end of the hall, revolver at the ready. "Hastings!" Poirot whispered. "The third domino will be delivered any moment now. The sender has been among us. This tall lady at the staircase must be entrusted with the task." He glanced at his watch. Midnight plus 3 minutes. On cue, a muffled knock sounded at the guest suite door. Hastings stiffened. Poirot gestured, and moved to stand beside him. The knock came again, softer, hesitant. Hastings opened the door a crack. A delicate hand slipped through, holding a small black envelope sealed with crimson wax. Poirot, silently, took the envelope. He broke the seal and withdrew a folded note. "One life stands condemned unless the gambler's fate is revealed. Meet me in Lady Greystone's greenhouse at dawn." A friend of Justice Poirot's eyes narrowed as he read. Beneath, the note lay the final domino, its red face now etched with a miniature parchment design, a map fragment. He held the tile to the lantern light. Etched in microscopic lines was the layout of Greystone's walled gardens, with a small X marking a glass house near the northern boundary. "Hastings," Poirot said grimly, "the puzzle has deepened. The sender now demands that we solve a wager, a gamble before daylight, or one of your hosts will perish. The greenhouse, just beyond the maze of hedges. We must reach it by dawn." Hastings nodded, slipping a new silk pouch over the domino. "What's our next move?" he asked. Poirot walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit grounds. "We shall leave immediately. Alert Lady Greystone and secure Margaret and Isabel within their room. Then we follow the map, reaching the greenhouse before anyone else. Once there, we shall expose the culprit and rescue the condemned. Time is of the essence." He turned back to Hastings. "And Hastings," he added softly, "keep your revolver at hand. In this game of shadows, the stakes are mortal." With precise urgency, they retraced their steps to the guest suite. As they entered, the lamps cast trembling shadows on the walls. Inside, Lady Greystone's face was pale but determined. "Monsieur Poirot, what have you discovered?" she asked. He produced the map fragment domino. "Madame, we must implore your cooperation. At dawn, I will confront our adversary in the greenhouse. But for now, I ask you to trust me. Keep everyone here safe. I shall return, and justice, true justice, will prevail." Lady Greystone nodded, her auburn hair gleaming in lamplight. "You have my trust, monsieur." Poirot laid the domino on the table among the lantern's glow. "Then good. Let us prepare for the night's final act." Outside the door, the wind rose, rattling window panes. The echo of the grandfather clock chimed 1 o'clock in the morning. Within the walls of Greyston Manor, fear and determination intertwined. Yet Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, chiselling away at the enigma until the final piece fit snugly into place. And somewhere, in the silent hush of night, the watchers in the shadows observed as the game edged toward its deadly resolution. Chapter 3. The Greenhouse Gambit. The moon had dipped below the horizon by the time Poirot, Hastings, and Lady Arabella Greystone slipped out of the manor's side door. The dew-slick stones glistened under the first pale light of dawn, and the walled gardens lay before them like a silent labyrinth. Poirot held the final crimson domino in its silk pouch. The tiny map fragment, etched with microscopic precision, pressed against his palm. Now it was a question of follow-through. The greenhouse lay beyond the maze hedge, its glass panes dark and still, waiting for the friend of justice and the fulfillment of his grim wager. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "we must move, quickly. The hedge maze has 3 entrances. Only one leads directly to the northern glass house. I observed its alignment from the map. It corresponds to the eastern gateway." He pointed toward a vine-clad archway. "We go there." Lady Greystone nodded, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the chill. Hastings carried a lantern, its flickering flame casting long shadows against the hedgerows. The three advanced in single file toward the arch. As they passed beneath the tangle of ivy, Hastings paused. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, "do you truly believe this map fragment will guide us safely? What if the sender misleads us altogether?" "Mon ami," Poirot replied, "the puzzle-maker desires a show of intellect. If his map points us awry, no matter. We shall find the glass-house by scent of glass and steam. But I trust the map. The micro-etchings are too precise to be random." They skirted the high hedges until, 2 turns later, they found themselves before a heavy iron gate, gnarled branches woven into its frame. A latch lifted with a protest, and they entered the maze hedge proper. Walls of clipped yew soaring above their heads, corridors twisting like a serpentine puzzle. Poirot consulted the domino once more, then placed it back in its pouch. "First left, then 2 rights, and follow the path until the hedges give way," he murmured. Hastings did as instructed, counting each turn with exaggerated seriousness. Lady Greystone stumbled once on a protruding root, but Hastings steadied her with a gentle arm. Suddenly, a soft hiss of steam hissed behind a veil of vine leaves. Poirot held up a hand. "Hush! The glass-house is near." They stepped through a final opening, and before them stood the greenhouse, a magnificent structure of wrought iron and paned glass, its peaked roof disappearing into a lattice of creeping roses. The panes were fogged on the inside as though warmed by plant-house heat. A single lamp within glowed dimly, backlighting the silhouettes of florid ferns and towering orchids. Poirot approached the heavy double doors. He listened. No sound, save the drip of condensation and the distant tolling of the manor clock, now striking 2. He tapped the glass lightly. The faintest rustle answered. He tapped again, more firmly. "Who's there?" he called in French, then in English. "We come seeking the author of The Crimson Domino." The greenhouse doors swung inward with a groan, releasing a warm, humid breath. Hastings clicked on his revolver's hammer. Lady Greystone clutched Poirot's arm. Inside, the lantern revealed a circular room crammed with exotic greenery. Paths divided by marble benches curved between beds of orchids, palms, and ferns draped in dew. At the chamber's centre stood a wrought-iron table, and there, seated with her back to them, was the tall lady in a flowing gown, Isabel Greystone. Her dark hair was undone, falling over her shoulders. In her hand she held the crimson domino. "Isabel," cried Lady Greystone, rushing forward. "You hear?" Isabel did not flinch. She turned slowly, her face pale but composed. In her hand the domino bore a new marking, the tiny letter Q scratched into its red face. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mademoiselle," he said quietly, "you have been most industrious. Care to explain your role in this nocturnal drama?" Isabel rose, folding her arms. "It was I," she admitted, voice calm but firm. "I delivered the first domino to Edward's study, under my uncle's desk. I placed the second under Margaret's pillow, and the third I've brought here. My actions were all to bring to light a sordid matter." Poirot inclined his head. Monsieur Q, the questioner. Ah, but what sordid matter? Isabelle glanced at her aunt, then back to Poirot. Edward, my cousin, has misused the family fortune. Investments in his pet project have bankrupted the Greystone Trust. Lady Greystone nearly lost the estate. I tried persuasion, confrontation, everything, but he would not confess or amend, so I appealed to justice. Lady Greystone gasped. Isabel, you risked our lives. I know, Isabel said, but justice requires sacrifice. Each domino bore a warning. Identify the culprit, or risk losing everything, including life. The warnings, the midnight summons, they were the only way to rouse you all. Poirot stepped forward, producing a fourth domino, the black tile with a blood red, face bearing the etched map fragment. He placed it beside Isabel's tile. You see, mademoiselle, your scheme was ingenious, yet flawed. You assumed that fear would compel confession. Instead, you almost brought tragedy upon innocent lives. Isabel's chin trembled. I did what I thought necessary. Hastings lowered his revolver. Necessary or not, the law demands confession. He stared at Isabel. We should take you back now. Isabel shook her head. No, not yet. You still do not grasp the full scope. She lifted her hand to reveal a small envelope. Here is Edward's true betrayal. She handed it to Poirot. Poirot broke the seal and read, To my dearest Arabella. By the time you read this, it may be too late to save the Greystone name. I confess, I diverted funds to build an orphanage in India, to atone for my own father's cruelty. I could not allow the estate to suffer in secret. I beg your forgiveness and trust. Edward Lady. Greystone's hand flew to her heart. He diverted the funds? For charity? She turned to Isabel. You should have come to me, child. You should have trusted me. Isabel's eyes filled. I was afraid you would disinherit him, ruin him, and lose the goodwill of the tenants. I thought you would never forgive. Poirot folded the letter. A tragic misunderstanding, then, at the cost of terrorizing your own kin. Mademoiselle, your fears were genuine, but your methods unwise. Isabel clutched the crimson domino to her chest. What will become of me? Poirot regarded her kindly. We must present the facts to Lady Greystone. You will face no criminal charge. This was an act born of love, not malice. Restitution will be made, and the Greystone fortune remains intact, thanks to Edward's charity. Lady Greystone stepped forward and embraced Isabel. My dear, forgive me, and thank you, Edward. She turned to Poirot. Monsieur, you have saved our family. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, it was I who solved the puzzle, but it was Miss Greystone's conscience that led us here. He glanced at Hastings. Let us return inside and awaken Captain Hastings. The dawn approaches. They emerged from the greenhouse into a sky paled by sunrise. The maize hedge behind them was a tangled silhouette, its mysteries laid bare by the resolution of human motives. Poirot tucked the final domino into his pocket, secure in the knowledge that justice, though imperfect, had prevailed. In the east, a golden glow heralded a new day for Greystone Manor, one of confession, forgiveness, and familial unity. And as they walked back through the gardens, Poirot reflected that Sometimes the greatest gambit was not of cards or dominoes, but of love pitted against fear, and the little grey cells that tip the balance. Chapter 4. Echoes of the past and new. Shadows Dawn's first pale light filtered through the mullioned windows of Greystone Manor's great hall, as the household gathered for a hastily arranged breakfast. The long oak table groaned beneath platters of smoked salmon, fresh fruit, and warm rolls. Silver tea and coffee urns steamed gently at one end. Lady Arabella Greystone sat at the head, her composure restored, though her eyes bore the lines of a sleepless night. To her right, Edward Greystone, cousin and once suspected malefactor, looked fatigued but resolute. Opposite him, Margaret, Fanshawe, and Isabel Greystone exchanged shy glances, their bond strengthened by the night's ordeal. Captain Hastings flanked Poirot, who appeared calm, his little grey cells already moving on to the next phase of the mystery. Poirot rose and tapped a teaspoon against his porcelain cup. "Mes amis," he began, "we have arrived at a crossroads. Last night's revelations have laid bare Edward's secret charity and Isabel's impassioned, albeit misguided, intervention. But I sense that the echo of these events still stirs unseen currents among the household." Edward cleared his throat. "I owe you all an explanation. Yes, I diverted trust funds to build the orphanage in Bengal, but with the intent to return them as soon as I secured alternative financing. Underestimated the time needed and the risk to the estate. I meant no harm to this family." Lady Greystone nodded gravely. "Your intentions were noble, Edward, but transparency would have spared us much agony." Margaret dabbed her lips with her napkin. "If only someone had confided in me. I was so afraid, so helpless." Isabel reached across the table and clasped Margaret's hand. "I should have told you both. Fear made me rash." Poirot inclined his head. "All is forgiven, eventually. But now, if we are to restore harmony, we must address any remaining discontents. I have reason to believe one more threat remains." A hush fell. Hastings leaned forward. "Another threat? From whom?" Poirot tapped his cup. "Recall the walled gardens. As we emerged from the greenhouse, I noticed footprints not just from our party, but two others, larger boots that did not match, Lady Greystone's driver, and lighter shoes that suggested a maid. Yet none of the staff has admitted involvement." Lady Greystone frowned. Only Edward's valet, Mr. Fletcher, and Mrs. Whittaker the housekeeper were on duty. Both deny leaving the hall. Poirot adopted his most thoughtful expression. "Let us question them discreetly. Mrs. Whittaker, may I have a word?" The housekeeper, a matronly woman in a dark gown, approached the table, smoothing her apron. "Madame," Poirot began quietly, "were you abroad at midnight?" Mrs. Whittaker's lips trembled. I was in my quarters, monsieur. Yet I confess I heard footsteps in the corridor and saw a tall figure pass by my door." "Did you recognize her?" Hastings asked kindly. She swallowed. "Only her silhouette, a woman in a long coat. But I did see she carried something in her hand." Poirot nodded. "I see. Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker." He dismissed her gently, then sent word for Mr. Fletcher, Edward's valet, who was polishing silver in the butler's pantry. Fletcher arrived stiff-backed. "Monsieur Poirot?" "Your punctual service is appreciated, Mr. Fletcher. Tell me, did you leave the manor after dinner?" Fletcher's dark eyes darted. "I delivered Monsieur Edward's letters to the post office across the village. I returned before 10 o'clock. "Alone?" Hastings pressed. "Alone," Fletcher said firmly. "I have no cause to deceive you." Poirot studied him. "And yet, Fletcher, the footprints in the greenhouse match a man's boot. Size 9, brogue design. You wear size 8, and your shoes are not brogues." Fletcher stiffened. Perhaps I borrowed boots." "Of whom?" Poirot's voice was gentle yet insistent. Fletcher's shoulders sagged. "I lent my boots to Mr. Lawrence last evening. He injured his ankle and needed bigger shoes, but I did not enter the greenhouse. Mr. Lawrence, that would be the estate's head gardener, a taciturn man of half-Irish descent. Poirot made a note to speak with him later." With Fletcher dismissed, Poirot and Hastings returned to the dining hall, where Lady Greystone was arranging Edward's letters into piles. On one, she found the donation receipts for the orphanage. On another, an anonymous note. "Your benevolence is commendable, but the Domino's final question remains unanswered. Who will truly pay the price?" Isabel's face paled. "It seems our game is not yet over." Poirot looked to the servants' entrance. "I propose we convene in the library this afternoon and review every recent guest and staff movement." The last domino demanded the gambler's fate be revealed, and though we have unravelled the family's secret, another player in this drama remains at large, perhaps upset by Edward's charity or resentful of the family's fortune. By midday, the key figures assembled in the library, a panelled room lined with leather-bound tomes and portrait busts of Greystone ancestors. The hearth fire glowed warmly. Poirot stood before a writing table, on which he laid out the 3 crimson dominoes, the unmarked one, the miniature map, and the etched Q tile. Next to them, he set the new note. "Observe," he said. "Each tile bears a clue. Blood, location, question. The final note speaks of someone who sees the domino, scheme as unjust. We must identify who among us feels wronged by Edward's actions. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to recall any grievances you hold." Lady Greystone rose. "I myself was misled, but no malice was meant. Is there among you someone who has yet to speak?" Mr. Fordham the butler stepped forward. "Madame, if I may, the head gardener, Mr. Lawrence, was furious when the manor grounds were neglected last fortnight. His plan for the rose arbours was delayed by lack of funds. He learned only yesterday of Edward's redirection of money." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Mr. Lawrence, pray join us." The gardener entered, his coat still bearing earth stains. Poirot addressed him directly. "Mr. Lawrence, did you believe the Greystone family abandoned its horticultural heritage?" Lawrence's voice was rough. "I love this place, monsieur. My roses, my topiaries, their care demands resources. When the funds vanished, I feared the gardens would perish. He broke off, anger surfacing. "I saw Edward's actions as betrayal." "Yet you made no attempt to speak with Lady Greystone," Hastings prompted. Lawrence's gaze dropped. "I'm a gardener, not a gentleman. I did not think to seek audience, and so you resolved to speak through darkness and fear." Poirot summarized. "You borrowed Fletcher's boots, snuck through the gardens, placed the dominoes, and observed from the shadows." Lawrence drew in his breath. "I left Hale the crimson domino on the mat of Miss Fanshaw's door, only to wake them, not to harm. Poirot leaned forward. "Your grievance was genuine, but your method, terror, is unacceptable. You sought to provoke confession through fear, as did Miss Isabel. Two misguided agents of justice." Lady Greystone looked to Edward with tears in her eyes. "Our home has suffered enough." Isabel stood. "I confess, I urged him on. I handed over the final tile to him, because I believed it was the only way to rouse him." Lawrence turned to her, and I watched, thinking I pursued justice for the gardens. Poirot raised a hand. "Peace. We have unmasked all players. The dominoes delivered night's terror, but revealed day's truth." He turned to Lady Greystone. "Your family stands intact. Charity, love, and forgiveness will rebuild trust. Let us remove these tokens of fear." Together they collected the dominoes and the final note, placing them in Poirot's silk pouch. The tension in the room dissolved. Outside, distant church bells tolled the hour, and a soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of blooming roses. Edward stepped forward. "I promise to restore the garden funds, and to be transparent henceforth." Lady Greystone embraced him. Margaret and Isabel hugged after. Lawrence bowed his head. Hastings patted Poirot on the shoulder. Poirot smiled. "Justice has been served, not by dominoes, but by revealing the human heart's depth. And now, mes amis, breakfast awaits, this time without drama." They descended from the library into the sunlit hall, leaving behind a night of mystery and emerging into a day of renewal. The crimson domino had wrought fear, but from its fragments came unity and truth, and in the gardens beyond, the roses would bloom anew, tended by hands both repentant and devoted. Chapter 5. Shadows Beneath the Rose. Arbour's morning sunlight streamed through the arched windows of Greystone Manor's drawing-room, casting latticed patterns of light and shadow across Persian rugs and carved mahogany furniture. The household had gathered once more, this time in a spirit of reconciliation rather than fear. Lady Arabella Greystone presided at a low tea-table, her silver hair gleaming, while Edward, Margaret, Isabel, and even Mr. Lawrence sat nearby, sipping delicate cups of Earl Grey. Captain Hastings leaned against the mantel, and Hercule Poirot reclined in a wing-back chair, his little grey cells evidently satisfied, until, that is, a soft tap at the door heralded the arrival of Jean-Louis, Poirot's ever-efficient steward. "Monsieur Poirot," Jean-Louis announced, "there is a visitor from the village insisting upon seeing you immediately. He says it concerns last night's events." Poirot set down his teacup gracefully. "Très bien, Jean-Louis. Show him in." He exchanged a quick glance with Hastings. Curious. Village folk rarely meddle in manor affairs unless scandal touches their livelihood. At a gesture from Jean-Louis, the door opened to admit a tall, lean man in a dark tweed coat and bowler hat. His face was lined and worn, eyes flickering with nervous intensity. "Mr. Poirot," he began, removing his hat, "I am Francis Mellor, head constable of Millbrook. I apologize for intruding, but there has been a burglary at Lady Greystone's summer cottage. The police believe it is connected to the disturbances here." Lady Greystone's fine features paled. "My summer cottage? But that has been closed since autumn." Mellor nodded. "Yes, madam. Forced entry discovered this morning. Several valuable heirlooms. Your grandmother's cameo brooch, a silver, snuff-box, and a leather-bound journal have been taken. The lock shows signs of skillful picking. There were no footprints, except those of a small rodent. The intruder was cautious. Poirot rose, his expression sharpening. "What journal, Constable?" Mellor reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded sheet. The journal belonged to Lady Arabella's grandmother, Arabella I. It contains references to a family secret, something about a hidden heir. The police recovered this clue on the stoop. He handed Poirot a scrap of parchment, edges singed. Poirot smoothed it flat and read aloud, "In the rose arbours lies the truth of the hidden child. Beware the 13th petal, for it leads to shadows." A collective murmur rippled through the room. Margaret clutched Isabel's hand. Edward frowned, and Lawrence shifted in his chair. Hastings whistled softly. Another mystery, and potentially a sinister one. Lady Greystone's voice trembled. "My grandmother's journal! I thought it lost in the fire of '42. She clasped her hands. What could this hidden child be? And who would risk their liberty to steal my family's past? Poirot tucked the parchment into his velvet-lined case. Mon Dieu! We must act swiftly. This burglary is likely the work of the same individual or cabal who orchestrated the Domino scheme. Their motives have deepened from mere coercion to outright theft. He paced a few deliberate steps. We will travel to the summer cottage at once. Hastings, prepare the motor car. Lady Greystone, do you have the keys? She rose and retrieved a small key from a silk-lined box, offering it to Poirot. Here it is. The cottage is 20 miles away, beyond the lake. Poirot inclined his head. Then we depart. Mr. Lawrence, I ask that your man here to supervise the staff and ensure no further incidents. The rest of us will investigate. Lawrence nodded. Anxiety etched on his features. Within the hour, Poirot, Hastings, Lady Greystone, Margaret and Isabel were seated in the sleek black motor car, speeding along the lane toward the lake. The morning air was cool, and the road glistened from an early mist. Poirot studied the parchment through his pince-nez, tracing the words with a fingertip. Rose arbours, 13th petal, hidden child. He murmured the rhyme as if it were a puzzle begging solution. Hastings glanced over. Do you think this theft relates to that cryptic rhyme? Or is someone taking advantage of our chaos? Possibly both, Poirot replied. Our adversary watches, waiting to exploit every crack in the Greystone legacy. If the journal mentions a hidden heir, they may seek to claim the inheritance by revealing or fabricating a child's existence. Margaret shivered despite the warmth of the sun. Could such a child exist? My mother always said there were rumours, but nothing was confirmed. Lady Greystone's voice was soft. My grandmother wrote of a child born out of wedlock to her youngest sister, who vanished shortly after birth. The child, if indeed alive, would have claim to the estate. Yet no record survives. Isabel clutched her prayer book. And now someone steals the only record we possessed. Someone wishes to ensure no denial of that claim. The motor car swung around a bend, revealing the serene lake on their right and the whitewashed summer cottage before them. Climbers of wisteria flowered along its railings, and a rose arbour, though neglected, framed the entrance. The front door was ajar, its lock broken. Poirot stepped out, gloved hands clasped behind his back. Hastings followed, revolver in hand. The ladies remained in the car until Poirot beckoned them forward. Inside, the cottage was cool and dim. Sunlight slanted through lace curtains, dust motes dancing in the beams. The sitting-room's fireplace held ashes of long-collected driftwood. On a small table lay the open journal, its leather cover scorched. The cameo brooch and silver snuff-box lay in a neat pile on a chair next to overturned cushions. There was no sign of forced struggle. Poirot knelt by the hearth. Note: no broken plaster or splintered wood. Entry was made with a key. He examined the lock. Not picked, but opened by its own mechanism. The intruder had the key. Hastings frowned. But how? The key was in Lady Greystone's possession until this morning. Unless a duplicate exists, Poirot mused, we must consider who had access. He rose and examined the rose arbour outside through a window. And here the clue references rose petals. He pointed to the climbing roses by the arch. The climbers had just begun their spring bloom. Look closely at the petal clusters. Margaret knelt and parted the blossoms. There, one rose has an extra petal, 13 instead of 12. She plucked the blossom and held it to the light, counting. Poirot nodded. The 13th petal, a deliberate mark. He pressed the petal between the pages of his notebook. This rose identifies the hidden doorway. He stepped across the room, tapped the wooden skirting board beneath the rose arbour window, and discovered a small latch concealed in the woodwork. With gentle pressure, a panel swung inward, revealing a narrow recess. Inside the secret compartment lay a small bundle wrapped in velvet. The missing journal, cameo, snuff-box, and, astonishing, a sealed envelope addressed to He Who Seeks the Truth. Poirot retrieved the envelope and broke its wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. To those who would lay claim, seek beneath the South Rose Arbour at midnight on the next full moon. There you will find the child's fate. A keeper of secrets. Lady Greystone gasped. Another midnight summons! She placed a trembling hand on her heart. This is intolerable. Poirot replaced the journal and valuables in the compartment and secured the latch. We have enough for now. Our adversary delineates the next point in this inheritance labyrinth. He turned to Hastings. We must return to the manor and conceal all keys. Isabel and Margaret, you shall both sleep in my suite. Safety in numbers. Lady Greystone and Edward will remain together as well. Back in the motor car, Isabel leaned close to Poirot. Monsieur, what is the meaning of the Keeper of Secrets? Another adversary? Or the same friend of justice? Poirot's eyes gleamed against the dawn. The writer of the journal refers to a guardian of the family legacy, someone who protects its hidden truths. That keeper may be a relative long thought dead. We must learn whom among us fits this description. He glanced at Lady Greystone, whose face was drawn. Have you any relatives beyond those known? Cousins in remote counties, perhaps? Lady Greystone shook her head. No, this cottage belonged to my grandmother alone. She confided in no one, save the child's mother. She trailed off, tears in her eyes. The guilt of that secret has shadowed our family for generations. Poirot offered her a discreet hand. We shall bring that shadow into the light, madame. Justice and truth, not fear, shall guide us." As the manor's turrets reappeared on the horizon, Hastings looked to Poirot. "Another midnight rendezvous on the full moon. Doable, if we can decipher who the keeper is." Poirot nodded. "We shall interrogate the staff tonight. There must be one who knows more than they admit." He leaned back, satisfied. The case of the Crimson Domino has revealed one secret. The case of the hidden child will unlock another. And when the full moon rises, the truth will be laid bare. The motor car rolled through the gates of Greyston Manor as the household's new dread settled in. Not only the threat of dominoes and riddles, but the promise of a secret child waiting to be discovered beneath the rose arbours. An heir hidden by shame, protected by silence, and now summoned forth by shadows and moonlight. The game continued, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the fragments of a story centuries old. Chapter 6. Under the full moon, evening air lay heavy over Greystone Manor, as the household prepared for another restless night. Within the great hall, lamps were lit and shutters secured. Servants moved silently about, their whispers hushed by the weight of recent revelations. Outside, the full moon rose slowly above the treetops, its pale light illuminating the rose arbours where a secret child's fate was said to lie hidden. In the east wing, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings sat at a small oak table, scattered with notes, keys, and the scrap of parchment recovered from the summer cottage. "Midnight approaches," Hastings observed, checking the mantel clock. "You believe the Keeper of Secrets will meet us beneath the South Rose arbour at the stroke of 12. Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes, mon ami. The parchment's wording is explicit. Seek beneath the South Rose arbour at midnight, on the next full moon. We are under no illusions that this keeper will appear unless convinced we are worthy and capable of protecting the truth." Hastings frowned. "But who might this keeper be? You said that Lady Greystone's grandmother alone tended this secret. Who then guards it now?" "That is the question," Poirot replied, tapping a slender finger against his lips. "Our suspects remain among the staff, or perhaps one hidden relative. Last night we heard whispers that Mr. Lawrence knew more than he admitted, yet Lawrence displayed no knowledge of the child's whereabouts beyond the compartment. We must think laterally." They rose and moved to the window overlooking the walled gardens. In the silvered moonlight, the rose arbours glowed with ghostly petals. The wind carried their delicate fragrance. Hastings pointed. "See how the petals of that southern arbour shimmer? A gentle breeze shifts them, but one rose seems undisturbed." "Precisely," Poirot said. "A single rose with a 13th petal marked the entrance before. We must find that same bloom this night." He reclaimed the final crimson domino from his coat pocket, feeling the etched Q under his fingertips. "And we must present ourselves with modesty and respect. Should our keeper distrust us, the child's secret may be lost to darkness forever." The manor's side door. Lady Greystone, Edward, Margaret, and Isabel waited, their faces pale under the lantern's glow. Edward gripped Isabel's hand. Margaret's eyes darted between the rose bushes and the servants' bustling forms. Lady Greystone, wrapped in a fine wool shawl, nodded gravely as Poirot and Hastings approached. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, we shall accompany you to the arbour's edge, but shall not enter. We trust your judgment. Thank you, madam, Poirot replied. Your presence lends weight to our mission. Edward, stand by Margaret. Isabel, remain near your aunt. Captain Hastings and I will lead. He spoke to the gathered household staff. Mr. Fordham, Rosa the housemaid, and Parker, the under-housekeeper. I require that you watch from the windows. Report any movement, but do not approach. Each bowed. With lantern in hand, Hastings led the party through a low colonnade into the rose garden. Their footsteps were muffled against the flagstones. The southern arbour stood before them, a graceful arch of wrought iron twined with climbing roses whose petals gleamed white in the Yorkshire moonlight. At its centre, one bloom outshone the rest, its petals numbering 13 against the dozen of its companions. Poirot advanced slowly, his presence calm and deliberate. He knelt, brushed a single finger across the extra petal, and paused to savour its scent. Here, he murmured. He rose and gestured for the group to step back. Hastings produced a small trowel from his coat and helped Poirot clear away a patch of ivy at the base of the arbour. Beneath the creeping vines lay a small wooden hatch, its surface carved with a rose motif. Just as we found at the cottage, Poirot said. He set the lantern beside the hatch and produced a keychain containing every key recovered thus far, each tested in turn. Moments passed as he tried pin after pin. At last, one key turned with a soft click. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow shaft descending into earth. A steady shaft of moonlight pierced the darkness, illuminating damp stone steps that wound downward. A faint, musty smell rose from below. Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot. "Shall we?" "Oui," Poirot said, "but take care. The keeper may lie in wait." He produced a second lantern, clicked it alight, and handed it to Hastings. Together they descended, Lady Greystone urging her family to remain at the arch above. The steps ended in a small subterranean chamber hewn from rock. Pillars of rough stone flanked a low dais, upon which rested a simple wooden cradle draped in velvet. Within that cradle lay a small leather-bound book, tied with crimson ribbon, and beside it a folded letter sealed with the Greystone family crest. Poirot advanced, his footsteps echoing softly. Margaret pressed her hand against her chest. Isabel covered her mouth. Lady Greystone's shawl rustled as she leaned forward. Edward gripped his sister's shoulder. At the foot of the dais stood the keeper. Long white hair fell over a grey cloak. A delicate, ancient face bore eyes deep, with sorrow and wisdom. The figure raised a slender hand, motioning the party forward. Poirot paused on the lowest step. "Madame," Lady Greystone began, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" The keeper spoke in a soft, resonant whisper. "I am Beatrice, daughter of Arabella I's youngest sister. I was born in secret, hidden away to protect the family's honour. My grandmother, your mother, raised me here, teaching me the worth of truth and mercy. When she died, she entrusted me with the legacy of this house and the secret of my bloodline." Beatrice's eyes swept over them. "I have watched from these shadows all my life." Lady Greystone gasped. "Aunt Beatrice, I never knew." "Your grandmother bore the burden for us both," Beatrice said. She forged the path so that the child might live. I remained near, tending the rose arbours and keeping the secret inviolate. Poirot stepped forward, inclining his head in ears and respect. Madame Keeper, your loyalty and care have preserved this family's unity. Yet others, Miss Isabel and Mr. Lawrence among them, have attempted to force truth from fear. Now, at last, truth comes freely. Beatrice looked to Isabel, whose tears glistened in the lantern light. My dear, come forward. Isabel advanced, kneeling by the cradle. She lifted the velvet drape and revealed the leather-bound book, Beatrice's own journal, recording every moment of her hidden life, her hopes and her fears. Margaret joined her, gingerly opening the journal. Within were pages of graceful handwriting, coloured pencil sketches of rose arbours in bloom, and a birth certificate proving Beatrice's identity. Ida Arabella Greystone, born 1887. You lived, Margaret whispered, all these years here. Beatrice nodded. I remained so that I might one day ensure the truth was revealed at the proper moment, when the house could bear it. But this night, the Domino threat and the cottage theft heralded a crisis. I tested the family's strength through these puzzles concealing the journal until you proved yourselves capable of forgiveness. Hastings set down his lantern. You set us all in motion, Keeper, yet your methods nearly cost lives. Beatrice's expression was gentle. I regret causing fear, but by domino and riddle you learned that secrets become perilous when buried. Better they stand in open daylight. Poirot inclined his head again. Madame, your lesson has been learned. The family stands together. No more thresholds of secrecy, only open doors. Lady Greystone approached, kneeling beside Beatrice. She took her aunt's hand. Forgive us, Beatrice. We should have sought you sooner. Beatrice smiled, tears glistening. All is forgiven. The roses have blossomed beneath our care. Now, at last, the house stands whole. Poirot assisted, them from the chamber, helping Beatrice ascend the steps as the rest followed. At the hatch, Lady Greystone paused and turned to Hastings. "Shall we bring Aunt Beatrice into the house?" she asked. "Yes, madame," Hastings said. "A place of honour near the rose window in the great hall." They emerged from the arbour to find the servants perched at windows, eyes wide with amazement. Mr. Fordham hurried down the gravel path with fresh lanterns. Poirot closed the hatch and locked it with the keeper's key, tucking the crimson ribbon within his coat. Under the glow of the full moon, the Greystone family reunited. Lady Greystone embracing her long-lost aunt, Isabel and Margaret weeping with relief, Edward smiling through tears. Poirot and Hastings watched from the arch, their little grey cells at rest. Poirot inhaled the night air. All mysteries at last resolved, Hastings. The dominoes, the theft, the riddles, all led us here, to truth beneath the rose arbours. Hastings nodded, and no life was lost, only hearts unburdened. Beatrice stepped forward, extending her hand to Poirot. "Monsieur, thank you," he bowed. "The honour was mine." As the household processed the miracle of reunion, the silver moon reached its zenith. In its light, the roses gleamed, petals trembling with dew, and one 13-petalled rose stood as sentinel over the secret now laid bare. Its keeper welcomed. Home at last. Chapter 7. The dawn of reconciliation morning. Light crept through the mullioned windows of Greyston Manor's great hall, as the household gathered once more beneath glittering chandeliers. The air was charged not with fear, but with hopeful anticipation. Servants in crisp livery bore silver, trays of tea and toast, while Lady Arabella Greystone, resplendent in a soft morning gown of pale rose, welcomed each guest with a gracious nod. Beatrice, the newly revealed keeper of secrets, took her place beside Arabella at the head of the table, her presence a symbol of the family's restored unity. Poirot and Captain Hastings entered quietly at the foot of the stairs. Both carried small volumes of notes and sketches, records of the past night's extraordinary events. Hastings offered his arm to Poirot, who accepted it with that characteristic slight bow of gratitude. They crossed the polished marble floor together and paused before the gathering. "Mes amis," Poirot announced, voice soft yet carrying. "We have endured midnight summons, stolen legacies, and hidden heirs, only to emerge in the light of day with our bonds strengthened. This morning I propose we honour our restored family by renewing the very heart of Greystone Manor, its gardens, and by welcoming Aunt Beatrice into the life and legacy she has long been denied." A murmur of agreement rippled across the hall. Edward stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mother, cousins, Aunt Beatrice, this afternoon I would like to host a small gathering in the rose garden. We will dedicate a new arbour in your name, dear aunt, as a token of our love and gratitude." Beatrice's pale face softened into a smile. "It would mean the world to me, Edward." She glanced at Lady Greystone, who nodded with evident relief. Poirot nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And I shall accompany you, of course, to oversee that the Festival of Roses proceeds without further enigmas." He turned to Hastings. "Captain, perhaps you will ensure the grounds are prepared and that the staff remain, how shall I say, unmysteriously engaged." Hastings grinned. "Consider it done, mon ami." As brunch concluded and guests drifted away to their private apartments, Lady Greystone pulled Poirot aside. "Monsieur, the entire household owes you a debt of gratitude. How can we ever repay you?" Poirot inclined his head politely. "Madame, the greatest repayment is the joy of seeing Greystone return to harmony. If, however, you wish to offer something more, may I request the journal kept by Aunt Beatrice? With her permission, of course, I would like to add her memoir to my personal archives of family mysteries." Beatrice, overhearing, stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, I would be honoured for you to keep my journal. I trust that you will treat it with the respect and discretion it deserves." "Ah, merci, madame," Poirot said, accepting the offer with a flourish. He paused, smiling at Hastings. "And now, I believe we have earned at least one day free of puzzles, a brief respite before I return to Baker Street." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Surely one day is not enough for you, Hercule." Poirot shrugged as if uncertain. "Perhaps two, but we shall see." By midday, the rose garden had been transformed into a scene of festivity. Lavender-hued tablecloths draped small round tables. Ceramic vases held fresh-cut blooms. A soft breeze rustled the white petals overhead. Under the new arbour, crafted in wrought iron and twined with climbing white roses, stood a brass plaque bearing the inscription, Beatrice Greystone, keeper of secrets and heart of our heritage. Lady Greystone guided her family toward the arbour. Edward held a silver shears. Margaret and Isabel each carried a basket of rose cuttings, and Beatrice led the way, her slender hand resting on the brass plaque. Poirot and Hastings arrived just before the dedication. Hastings, in shirt-sleeves rolled to the elbows, had overseen the planting of dozens of rose bushes around the arbour. He gestured proudly at the neat rows of soil, redded and rooted, thanks to a bit of manual labour and Captain Hastings's gardening prowess. Isabel laughed. "Hastings, you've outdone yourself." Poirot surveyed the scene. "Magnifique! Now, shall we proceed?" Lady Greystone spoke gently. "My dear Beatrice, on behalf of the Greystone family and all who dwell here, I dedicate this arbour and these roses to you. May their blooms forever remind us of the beauty that truth and love can bring." Beatrice stepped forward, took the shears, and with a small, precise snip, cut a single white rose from the arbour. She handed it to Lady Greystone, who placed it in Beatrice's hair. Then Edward and the others repeated the gesture, fastening small roses in each family member's lapel and hair. Poirot handed Beatrice his journal, a leather-bound volume with his own elegant script on the spine, Memoirs of Beatrice Greystone. She accepted it, running her fingers over the embossed title. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "It feels as though a burden has been lifted." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, it was long overdue." Hastings stepped beside him. "Now, Hercule, about that brief respite. I suggest we celebrate with a spot of lemonade and relish the absence of midnight summons for at least 24 hours. Poirot's moustaches twitched. 24 hours? Yes, perhaps that is wise. As the family dispersed beneath the dappled sunlight, Lady Greystone approached Poirot and Hastings. "I have a small matter to discuss," she said, gesturing toward a bench beneath a spreading oak. They followed her. "My solicitor arrives tomorrow morning," she explained. "He must finalize the trust amendments now that Beatrice is recognized as a rightful heir. I would like your assistance in ensuring the proceedings are impeccably confidential." Poirot nodded eagerly. "Madame, you may count on my discretion. I will accompany you to the chambers and observe proceedings to ensure no breach of privacy." Greystone smiled. "Thank you. And I would also like to commission you, Monsieur Hastings, to teach me some basic self-defense, so that, should another late-night delivery occur, I may be better prepared." Hastings laughed. "I will bring fencing foils and show you a few parries." Beatrice, following behind, added, "And I shall teach you the secrets of the rose arbours, so that no panel or hatch remains concealed." A ripple of laughter passed. Among them, the final echo of the night's terrors replaced by genuine joy. That evening, Poirot retired early to prepare for his return to London. In his suite, he laid out his maps and notes, placing Beatrice's journal atop the pile. He penned a letter to Captain Hastings, inviting him to dinner at Baker Street later in the week. Then, satisfied, he closed his eyes. At midnight, however, as the moon rose full above Baker Street, Poirot awoke with a start. In his mind's eye, he saw white petals shimmering in moonlight, the echo of past summons tugging at his curiosity. He sat up, padded to his desk, and wrote, "The game of shadows may rest, but the game of hearts never ends. H. Poirot." He sealed the note and placed it beside his lamp before returning to bed, a gentle smile on his face. In the quiet hours before dawn at Greystone Manor, no dominoes fell, no keys turned in hatches, and no stranger whispered behind rose arbours. Instead, the household slept peacefully, cradled by fragrant blooms and the promise of mornings unmarred by mystery, and somewhere perhaps a small white rose folded its petals, content that its 13th companion remained forever at rest. Chapter 8. The counsel of the solicitor at morning sunlight poured into the library of Greystone Manor, illuminating rows of leather-bound volumes and the velvet drapes that framed tall mullioned windows. The household had gathered once more. Lady Arabella Greystone sat at her accustomed place by the fireplace, flanked by Beatrice, Edward, Margaret, and Isabel. At the far end of the long mahogany table reclined Hercule Poirot, his petite form draped in an elegant smoking jacket, little grey cells visibly at work behind his watchful eyes. Captain Hastings stood nearby, ready to assist, while Mr. Fordham presided over tea and freshly baked scones. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of their solicitor, Mr. Theodore Caldwell of London's Lincoln's Inn. He entered with precise courtesy, bowing to Lady Greystone and nodding to Poirot and the assembled family. His dark waistcoat and cravat bespoke professionalism. His grey hair was neatly parted, and his spectacles rested low on his nose. "Madam, monsieur," Caldwell began, producing a heavy leather satchel, "I thank you for your punctuality. We must formalize the amendments to the Greystone Trust, now that Miss Beatrice Greystone has been officially recognized as a beneficiary." He set the satchel on the table and unfastened its brass clasps, revealing bundles of parchment, quills, and sealing wax. Lady Greystone exchanged a grateful glance with Beatrice. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Pray proceed." Her voice, though steady, betrayed a flutter of nervous anticipation. Caldwell arranged the documents neatly before him. "First, we shall read the codicil your late mother drafted in 1915, acknowledging her sister's child, Miss Beatrice, and granting her full rights under the trust. Next, we shall execute a new deed reflecting these changes." He passed copies of the codicil to Lady Greystone and Beatrice. With methodical care, they read the elegant script. "Let it be known that my beloved sister's daughter, concealed for reasons of propriety, shall henceforth join the Greystone Trust as a rightful owner of Greystone Manor and its estates. Signed, Arabella Greystone, 12th of June, 1915. Isabel whispered to Margaret, "It is beautiful. A hidden promise at last revealed." Beatrice's eyes glistened. "I never imagined seeing these words penned by my aunt. It unites us at last." Caldwell nodded. "Shall we proceed to signatures?" He produced 2 quills and 2 inkpots. Lady Greystone and Beatrice dipped their quills and signed the codicil with elegant strokes. Hastings offered ink to Edward and Isabel, who also signed as witnesses. Each signature was then countersigned by Caldwell himself. "Excellent," Caldwell declared, removing the signed pages and replacing them with fresh parchment titled Deed of Trust Amendment 2025. He outlined the contents. Beatrice Greystone, the henceforth full beneficiary. Succession rights clarified. Estate management roles redefined. Arabella as steward, Edward as executor. provision for maintenance of Rose Arbours and Greystone Cottage. As Caldwell read aloud the clauses, Poirot observed every gesture, every crease of Caldwell's brow. When Caldwell paused for the final signature, he produced wax and a seal bearing the Greystone crest. Margaret helped melt the wax. Edward pressed the die into it, producing a crisp emblem of the family arms. "Magnificent," Lady Greystone breathed. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell gathered the amended deed and codicil into his satchel. "I will file these in London and return with certified copies within the week. Until then, consider the trust legally amended." He bowed and made to depart. "Good day to you all." Just as Caldwell reached the door, Poirot rose. "Monsieur," he said in measured tones, "may I detain you for a moment longer?" Caldwell paused, hand on the doorknob. "Certainly, Monsieur Poirot. Is there a problem?" His voice was cordial, yet faintly guarded. Poirot advanced, fingertips steepled. "Earlier, you mentioned a codicil drafted in 1915. Might I examine the original document, as archived in the Manor's vault? I wish only to verify that the signature matches our family's records." A subtle shadow crossed Caldwell's face. He hesitated before responding. "The original is rather fragile, monsieur. It is usually kept under lock and chain, and I had not deemed it necessary to bring it for this meeting. The copies I provided are certified true." Poirot inclined his head. "Of course, but when the certified copies arrive, I should like to compare the handwriting and sealing wax to ensure authenticity. Forgive my caution, but the recent events at this estate have urged me toward scrupulous exactitude." Caldwell's lips thinned. He glanced back at Lady Greystone, who watched with polite curiosity. "Very well, monsieur. When the originals return to the Manor, you shall have my full cooperation." Poirot bowed. "Thank you, Monsieur Caldwell." Hastings stepped forward. "If you would join us for a moment's refreshment before the journey, Mr. Caldwell. Perhaps a glass of port." Caldwell hesitated a second, then smiled. "That would be most kind." He returned to the hearth and accepted a glass of port from Hastings. The family resumed their seats as Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance. Once Caldwell had poured a sip, Hastings engaged him in small talk about London's society. Meanwhile, Poirot's gaze drifted over Caldwell's satchel, now placed on a side table. The lock appeared unstained, yet Poirot's trained eye caught the gleam of metal where the clasp's hinge met the leather. Later, he would inspect it more thoroughly. After a polite quarter of an hour, Caldwell rose to leave, bidding the Greystone family farewell. At the door, he paused once more, turned back, and said in a lower voice to Poirot, "I trust I need not mention the increased premium on the estate's insurance, given these recent disturbances." Poirot regarded him serenely. "I will ensure the policy is updated, monsieur. Good day." Caldwell departed, closing the door with a soft click. For a moment silence reigned. Then Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, something troubles me about Mr. Caldwell's manner. Did you observe how he drew back when I requested the original codicil? And that comment on insurance, too pointed." Hastings nodded. He seemed uneasy, and he insisted the original was too fragile for presentation. Perhaps he fears comparison. Indeed. Poirot walked to the table where Caldwell's satchel lay. He raised a gloved hand, then paused, deciding against obvious examination. Instead, he returned to his chair and studied the family. Let us hope Mr. Caldwell is above suspicion. For now, our trust in him rests on the paper trail he maintains. Lady Greystone spoke gently. Monsieur Poirot, you have done more than any solicitor to protect this family. I trust your judgment completely. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, madame. Yet I advise caution. The inheritance's value, which now includes precious gardens, the cottage, and the family jewels, may tempt even a solicitor's conscience. Isabel shivered. Do you suppose Mr. Caldwell would go so far as to forge documents? Poirot's eyes danced. Forgery is certainly within the realm of possibility, and recall that the original codicil from 1915 has not been seen since the fire, save for this estate copy. A sly hand could substitute one parchment for another. Margaret gasped softly. Then what must we do? Poirot rose. Tonight, Hastings, and I will examine the vault where the original papers lie. We shall compare the codicil's watermark, the ink composition, even the embossing of the family seal. If all is genuine, our minds may rest. If not, we shall have uncovered yet another plot against Greystone Manor. Lady Greystone clasped her hands. Thank you, monsieur. You risk much for us. Poirot smiled gently. No risk is too great when mystery calls, madame. As afternoon light waned, the family dispersed to attend to the gardens and to prepare for the evening. Hastings joined Poirot in the corridor. Shall I fetch the keys for the vault? Oui, Poirot replied, but ensure no one follows. You. We must act with stealth, lest we alert Mr. Caldwell or any potential conspirator. Hastings bowed. Consider it done. Alone, Poirot stretched out his arms, as if embracing the silent library. Once again, my little grey cell shall be occupied through the night. But I find such mental exercise preferable to any rest. He waited by the hearth, anticipation gleaming in his eyes, as the shadows lengthened and the promise of another clandestine investigation stirred the air of Greystone Manor. Chapter 9. The Midnight Examination of the Vault. The household of Greystone Manor had retired early that night, the events of the afternoon's trust amendments still fresh in everyone's thoughts. Behind the heavy shutters and sealed doors, the lamps shone with a subdued glow, and the corridors were hushed except for the soft ticking of hallway clocks. In his suite on the second floor, Hercule Poirot sat at his writing desk, examining the certified copy of the 1915 codicil that Mr. Caldwell had left with Lady Greystone. By his side lay the sealed envelope from the solicitor, its wax crest unbroken. Captain Hastings arrived at precisely 10:30, carrying a small oil lamp and a ring of brass keys. His expression was sober but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, all is prepared. I have obtained the vault key from Lady Greystone's study, and the night porter has been asked to remain away until dawn. We have the hour to ourselves. Très bien, Poirot said, evening the folds of his cravat and pushing back a lock of hair. Let us proceed. We must compare the certified copy with the original parchment. If any discrepancy exists in the watermark, the ink shade, or the seal's embossing, we shall lay bare Mr. Caldwell's intentions. They left the suite and crept down the corridor, the lamp's flame flickering against the tapestry-lined walls. At the foot of the grand staircase, Hastings paused to ensure the servants' quarters were dark. Poirot nodded, and they descended to the library wing. The vast oak doors to the vault corridor stood closed. Only a small lantern lit the hallway beyond. Poirot produced a slender metal rod with a polished handle. "This tool will gently lift any dust from the floor before we enter, Hastings. Footprints in the dust will betray if someone has tampered with the vault tonight." Hastings set down the lamp and swept the tool across the stone flagstones. A fine white powder rose in the lamp's glow. Neither man had disturbed a single grain. Hastings tapped his gloved finger against the floor. "All clear, monsieur." Poirot smiled. "Parfait. Now for the key." He took Hastings's ring of keys, laid each upturned head against the vault door's lock, and tried them in sequence. At last, one yielded with a soft click. The iron door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a narrow corridor lined with security bolts and two more locks, one on each side. Inside, the corridor walls were traced with brass posts that held electric lights, now switched off. Istreku far end stood a sturdy door, its surface embossed with the greystone crest and the date 1892. Hastings crossed and inserted the vault key into the central lock, while Poirot held the lamp over the panel. With a final turn, the door swung inward. The vault was a cold, domed chamber of rough-hewn stone. Along its perimeter ran waist-high shelves of wrought iron, laden with leather-bound volumes, locked boxes, and scroll tubes. In the centre stood a massive oak desk with a locked drawer. Poirot stepped in, inhaling the faint scent of parchment and beeswax. He cast his gaze across the shelves, then turned to the desk. "Observe, Hastings," he said, setting down the lamp. "The original codicil should be here, in the scroll tube marked 1915. He located two scrolls, one labelled with a parchment tag, Codicil 1915, the other labelled Family Seals. Both were secured with wax seals, one bearing the greystone crest, the other a simple ring. Poirot gently tapped the tube's seal with his nail. Intact. Hastings fetched his pocket-knife and carefully broke the wax seal on the Codicil 1915 scroll. Poirot held the lamp close as Hastings drew it free. Unfurling the parchment, Poirot compared it at once with the certified copy. Overlapping them, he noted the handwriting was identical. The looping A's, the flourish on the G of greystone, the slight smudge at the end of the signature. The ink, however, told another story. "See here," Poirot murmured, pointing to a faint cinnamon hue in the ink. "This original has caught the faintest trace of oxidization. Brown tones at edges, consistent with an ink of over a century. The certified copy, by contrast, is jet black, made with modern iron gall ink. That, Hastings, is a first indication of substitution." Hastings frowned. So Mr. Caldwell provided copies rather than the original, knowing they would not match. Precisely. Poirot replaced the documents carefully and turned to the desk's locked drawer, where he believed the inkpots and blotters once used by Lady Greystone's mother might be stored. Hastings tried the drawer's lock. It too yielded. Inside lay an assortment of leather-bound diaries and two small glass bottles, one empty, the other still half full of dark viscous ink. Poirot examined the bottles, holding each to the light. The empty one is labelled 1915 Codicil. The remaining one is modern, with factory mould markings. Caldwell has kept a pot of modern ink here, perhaps for witness notations, but he did not remove the original pot. Therefore, he could offer certified copies, produced with fresh ink, to mask any alterations in the deed. At that moment, a distant noise reverberated through the vault corridor, a faint click, as though someone was unlocking the vault door from the outside. Hastings' eyes flashed. "Monsieur, someone is entering, quickly!" Poirot lifted the lamp. "Hide the documents." He swept the scroll back into its tube and replaced it on the shelf. He slid the ink bottles into a lower drawer of the desk. Then he and Hastings dashed behind a rack of scrolls at the far end. The oak door rattled as the outer locks clicked, and the door swung inward. Footsteps entered the vault. Poirot pressed his back against the stone wall. Hastings crouched, revolver drawn, beside him. Through the narrow gap between iron shelves, they saw the silhouette of a man step in. The broad shoulders, the tall frame unmistakably those of Mr. Theodore Caldwell. He carried a candle in one hand and a heavy satchel in the other. Caldwell approached the oak desk, his steps measured. Hastings stifled his breath as Caldwell set the satchel on the desk and unlatches its clasps. Poirot noted Caldwell's face, illuminated by the candle, the calm features now drawn in concentration. Caldwell removed a set of papers from the satchel, a freshly printed deed that mirrored the one signed earlier, but with subtle variations. Poirot, straining to hear, caught Caldwell whispering to himself, "Must replace the original, or risk confession. Iron gall, not needed." Caldwell laid the papers out and opened a small vial of seal wax, melting it with a candle, flame. He pressed a seal into the wax, but it was a duplicate crest, slightly crooked. Hastings drew in his breath. Poirot nodded. At that moment Caldwell paused, mid-seal, centering the seal die. Poirot gave a small signal. Before Caldwell could stamp the wax, Hastings sprang out, revolver levelled. "Stop! Mr. Caldwell, you are under suspicion of forgery and conspiracy against the Greystone Trust." Caldwell startled, dropping the seal die. The candle flickered. He whirled, eyes wide. "Poirot! Captain! What? How did—" Poirot emerged calmly from behind the rack, lamp in hand, illuminating Caldwell's satchel and the freshly printed documents still laid out, unstamped. "Monsieur, I had hoped to avoid confrontation, but your intent was clear. You sought to replace the original codicil with a forged modern copy, to undermine Lady Greystone's honour and claim guardianship of Greystone Manor for yourself." Caldwell straightened, trying to gather composure. "Preposterous! I am the family's solicitor. I would never—" "You would," Poirot interrupted, "if it meant securing the estate and its fortunes for a client who requested your loyalty, someone who stands to gain by maintaining the secrecy of Beatrice's legacy." Poirot turned to Caldwell's satchel and retrieved the printed deed and seal die. "These papers are your own handiwork, not Caldwell and Sons. You have betrayed your oath and stolen justice with a blade of bureaucracy." Caldwell's jaw clenched. He glared at Hastings, then at Poirot. "You have no proof beyond your conjecture." "On the contrary," Hastings said, striding forward, "there is the scroll tube, marked 1915, still bearing its century-old ink and wax. There is the pot of original ink here in the desk. And there are the enlisted witnesses, Lady Greystone, Beatrice, Miss Fanshawe, and Edward, who signed the true codicil. Your modern copies, printed in London this morning, cannot stand." Caldwell sank into a chair, defeated. I intended only to protect the property from confusion. I feared Beatrice's claims would shatter the trust's stability." "Shh!" Voice broke. "I believed I was acting in the family's best interest." Poirot inclined his head. "Your instincts were misguided. You almost destroyed what you sought to protect." He nodded to Hastings. "Take the seal die and printed documents. We shall present them to Lady Greystone." Hastings secured the die and papers. Poirot stepped to Caldwell. "You will remain here until we have informed Lady Greystone. Justice demands your honesty, monsieur." Caldwell bowed his head. "I will confess all." As the vault door swung, closed behind them, Poirot exhaled. "Mon Dieu, Hastings, the Greystone legacy is now secure. The estate has withstood threats of violence, theft, and forgery. Let us hope there are no more shadows to dispel." Hastings sheathed his revolver. "A remarkable night, Hercule." Poirot gathered his lamp and led the way out of the vault. The echoes of the closing door, a final benediction on the truth that, once revealed, could never again be concealed. Chapter 10. The Reckoning in the Drawing-Room. Late morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Greystone Manor drawing-room, scattering prisms of light across the polished parquet floor. The household had assembled at Lady Arabella's summons. Beatrice and Edward seated near her, Margaret and Isabel at their side, Captain Hastings standing by the hearth, and Hercule Poirot, composed in his dark morning coat, standing before the long mahogany table. Mr. Theodore Caldwell sat opposite, his visage drawn with fatigue and contrition. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice calm but resolute, "we have descended into the vault, uncovered the forgeries, and revealed Mr. Caldwell's intentions. Now we must bring the matter to its proper conclusion, with candour and decorum befitting this house." He signalled Hastings to place the forged documents and seal die on the table. Lady Greystone rose, hands clasped. "Mr. Caldwell, I invited you here so that we might address these transgressions openly. My daughter and niece have endured midnight terror. My gardens have been violated, and my family's trust has been imperilled. Pray explain your actions." Caldwell stood slowly, smoothing his waistcoat. He bowed to the gathering. "Madame, Monsieur Poirot, I make no excuses. I believe that by presenting new, modern copies of the codicil, I could preempt any disputes over the trust's validity. I feared Beatrice's claims would destabilize the estate, and that confusion in the legal record would invite costly litigation. In my misguided zeal to protect this house, I crossed the line between counsel and conspiracy." Beatrice's eyes shone with both hurt and compassion. "You stole the original parchment, Mr. Caldwell, and attempted to replace it with a forgery. You risked everything to shield us from uncertainty." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Why did you not seek honest dialogue?" "There was no time," Caldwell replied, voice tight. "When I learned of Colonel Lawrence's threats, of dominoes delivered by hand, and of a theft at the summer cottage, I believed the estate under siege by forces that would use every detail, legal or familial, to undermine its stability. I thought I served you, Lady Greystone, by preventing that chaos." Lady Greystone regarded him coolly. "And yet you created the very chaos you feared. You betrayed my trust." She turned to Hastings. Captain, do we have any recourse among the statutes regarding solicitor misconduct? Hastings consulted a small notebook. Under the Solicitors Act, forging a trust document is a grave breach. Mr. Caldwell may face disbarment and criminal charges for forgery and conspiracy to defraud. Caldwell bowed his head. I accept full responsibility, and I will abide by any consequences. My only regret is the pain I have caused. Poirot stepped forward. Madame, I suggest we amend the trust one final time, preserving the original codicil and sealing it anew, and we instruct Mr. Caldwell, should he remain in service or not, to execute a public statement acknowledging the authentic succession. He turned to Caldwell. Monsieur, will you sign such a declaration? Caldwell met Poirot's gaze. Yes, monsieur. I will sign anything necessary to rectify my wrongdoing. Lady Greystone nodded. Then let us proceed. She signalled. Mr. Fordham, who brought in fresh parchment, quills, and sealing wax. Hastings produced the original scroll tube, and Poirot retrieved the genuine codicil from his coat pocket. Under the measured ministrations of hallowed ceremony, the parchment was unfurled and placed on the table. Lady Greystone and Beatrice each signed their names below the 1915 script, reaffirming their faith in that document. Edward and Isabel countersigned as witnesses, and Hastings affixed a small annotation certifying all parties' agreement. Finally, Caldwell took the quill, inked it, and in a trembling but legible hand composed the following statement beneath the codicil. I, Theodore Caldwell, solicitor to the Greystone Trust, acknowledge my unauthorized removal and attempted substitution of the original 1915 codicil. I affirm the authenticity of the original parchment and beg the forgiveness of Lady Arabella Greystone, her heirs, and all concerned. Theodore Caldwell, 14th of June, 2025. He pressed the quill aside and allowed Hastings to melt sealing wax, upon which Lady Greystone's crest was stamped anew. The seal smoothed upon the declaration, binding Caldwell's confession to the Trust's immutable record. A hush settled. Lady Greystone closed the parchment with a faint smile. Very good. This document shall be stored alongside the original in the vault, its confession as indelible as the codicil itself. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, the Greystone legacy stands restored, cleansed of falsehood and strengthened by truth. I propose we now break into luncheon in celebration of our perseverance. Beatrice rose. Indeed. Please, bring in the luncheon. She turned to Caldwell. And you, Mr. Caldwell, may join us if you wish, though I understand if you prefer solitude. Caldwell straightened. I will remain, madam, though I deserve no welcome. The servants entered bearing silver trays of smoked salmon, quiches, and fresh bread. Tea and coffee were poured, and the drawing-room filled with the gentle murmur of relieved conversation. Hastings poured Lady Greystone a cup of Earl Grey. Edward offered Beatrice a slice of lemon tart. Margaret and Isabel compared notes on their upcoming debut at the village fete. Poirot sipped his tea, observing the scene with satisfaction. He noted how Beatrice and Arabella exchanged sisterly glances, how Edward and Carey the butler, now more confident than servant, quietly discussed irrigation of the rose beds, and how Hastings, ever the loyal friend, bent to steady Caldwell's shaky hand as he passed to the sugar bowl. When the luncheon concluded, Lady Greystone tapped a spoon against her cup. May I propose a toast? To family, fractured by secrets, yet restored by honesty. She raised her cup. To family and truth. All raised cups in turn. To family and truth, they echoed. Later, as the guests filtered away to their afternoon pursuits, Poirot and Hastings lingered. The drawing-room, now in shadow, awaited the return of the servants. Poirot closed the curtains and extinguished the hearth-fire with a polished brass tool. Hastings leaned against the mantel. "And so, Hercule, the case concludes?" Poirot folded his hands. "Oui, mon ami. The threats have been neutralized, Domino terror quelled, the stolen journal returned, the hidden heir embraced, and the forger unmasked. The Greystone Trust stands secure." Hastings whistled softly. "A fine piece of detective work, and not a moment too soon." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "True. Yet I sense that Greystone Manor will remain forever etched in my memory, not for the puzzles alone, but for the resilience of its people." Hastings clapped him on the shoulder. "Well said. Now, shall we see if Miss Beatrice will accept your invitation to discuss her memoirs over tea?" Poirot bowed. "With pleasure. After all, we must ensure that her journal, now preserved in my archives, does justice to her remarkable life." He produced an embossed card and wrote a note to Beatrice, inviting her to join him in the drawing-room at 4 o'clock for a cup of coffee and a glimpse at his manuscript. As they locked the drawing-room door behind them, Poirot paused, hand on the brass handle. "Mon Dieu, Hastings," he murmured, "'tis rare to find a mystery so intricate and yet so redemptive. Greystone Manor has offered me a master-class in human character." Hastings grinned. "And you, Hercule, have offered Greystone Manor the gift of your little grey cells." Together they descended the grand staircase, the manor's quiet corridors echoing with the promise of stories finally laid to rest, and new chapters yet to be written in the lives of those who dwell beneath the rose-scented halls. Chapter 11. The Fate of Renewed Bonds. A clear summer morning greeted Greystone Manor and its surrounding village as if nature herself had donned her finest attire for the day's festivities. Painted bunting flapped cheerily between the ancient oaks lining the drive. Flower stalls of daisies, lupines, and peonies clustered beneath the rose arbours. And the air carried the laughter of children chasing one another with ribbons and jelly-bean-hued balloons. Through the great west window of the drawing-room, Lady Arabella Greystone surveyed the scene with satisfaction. Her pale gown, a soft echo of the white roses just awakening to dawn. Beatrice stood at her side, the golden sunlight painting gentle highlights in her silvered hair. "The village fete has never looked more inviting," she observed, her voice rich with contentment. "I confess, I feared that recent troubles might dampen the villagers' spirits." Lady Greystone smiled. "On the contrary, dear Beatrice, our trials have reminded everyone of the manor's place at the heart of this community. Today we celebrate not only summer's bounty, but the bonds that bind us all." Below in the courtyard, Edward Greystone directed the final preparations. He lent warmth to the day, greeting elderly tenants with firm handshakes, watching the local gardener arrange potting benches beside the labyrinthine topiary, and assisting Mrs. Dawkins, the village baker, with a milliner's stall stocked with lemon cakes and gingerbread. Margaret and Isabel perched on an arbour bench, weaving wildflower posies for the elder residents, while Captain Hastings supervised the Guess the Weight of the Peacock challenge, its painted fowl legions drawing delighted crowds. Hastings spotted Poirot at the garden's edge, seated upon a wrought-iron settee beside a small table draped in lilac linen. Upon that table lay Beatrice's newly bound memoir, the polished leather spine stamped in gold, and 2 steaming cups of mint tea. Poirot, immaculate in a pale morning suit, studied the memoir through a lorgnette before peering across at Beatrice with approval. "My dear keeper of secrets," he began with a benign smile, "you have outdone yourself. These recollections of childhood under the rose arbours rival any case file in intrigue and human emotion." Beatrice returned the lorgnette to its velvet case. "Hercule, you flatter me. Yet I feel these pages must belong not only to my cherished flourish, but to the community here. Your garden challenges, the fete, they all form part of the tapestry I wish to preserve." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, your journal captures both mystery and redemption. And may I say, the local children's game of Find the 13th Blossom honours your dramatic discovery beneath the arbour last moon." She chuckled softly. "They hide paper petals in the labyrinth, and each finder receives a sprig of white rose. It warms my heart. They sipped their tea as laughter drifted upward. A child's triumphant cry as she discovered a hidden petal, the tinkle of coins at the cake stall, the soft strains of a village band playing a spirited jig. The manor's great windows framed this tableau as if it were a living painting." By mid-morning, Lady Greystone descended the stairs, her shawl catching in the breeze. She crossed the lawn toward Poirot and Beatrice, graceful in her silver hair and carrying a basket of rose-shaped pastries. Hastings followed at a brisk clip, offering his arm to Margaret, who wore a wreath of daisies. "My friends," Arabella called, voice warm and clear, "the Reverend Smythe has arrived from St. Mary's. He will host a brief blessing of the gardens beneath the arbour before luncheon. I thought you might appreciate the ceremony." Poirot rose. "A most fitting touch. Shall I escort Aunt Beatrice to the arbour? She deserves her rightful place at the focal point of our celebrations." Beatrice accepted his arm, luminous in her joy. Together they crossed the lawn toward the new arbour, where the brass plaque gleamed and the white roses trembled in the gentle wind. A small cluster of villagers had assembled. Mrs. Dawkins and her husband, the local school-teacher, Miss Pryor, and the head gardener, Mr. Lawrence, whose taciturn countenance had softened over the previous fortnight. Reverend Smythe lifted his hymnal and began the blessing. "Almighty God, we give thanks for this flourishing garden, for the renewal of trust and fellowship, and for the spirit of honesty that binds us in love. Bless this arbour, that it may stand as testimony to truth, long hidden, now revealed. Amen." As he concluded, the assembled villagers offered quiet amens, and the breeze carried petals of rose and daisies across the summer sky. Hastings discreetly handed Beatrice a white rose pinned with a ribbon. She accepted it, placing it in her hair with a contented sigh. "Thank you, Reverend," Lady Greystone said. "Your words bring peace to us all." Smythe smiled kindly. "The grace of truth heals even the deepest wounds." After the blessing, children flocked to Beatrice, beseeching her for signatures in their autograph books. "Please, Miss Beatrice, sign as keeper of secrets," they implored. She crouched among them, writing each name with gentle patience. At a signal from Hastings Lily and Jack Dawkins performed a dance around the arbour, weaving ribbons in intricate patterns. Margaret and Isabel joined in, laughter sparkling as the multicoloured streamers braided among the roses. Poirot, watching with stern composure, allowed himself a brief, rare smile of delight. When the dance concluded, a banquet table of oaken planks hewn from manor timber was unveiled, laden with cold jambon, smoked trout, fresh berries, and jugs of elderflower cordial. The family and villagers gathered beneath the arbour's embrace, conversing in soft tones about the day's events. Margaret found herself beside Mr. Lawrence, who offered her rose-scented honey and apologized for his earlier reticence. "I was blind to many things," he admitted quietly. "Your aunt's legacy deserved respect, not suspicion." He bowed his head. "Thank you for your forgiveness." Margaret took his hand. "Thank you for your dedication to the gardens that first led us here. You, too, are a part of our story." Across the table, Edward raised a glass of cordial. "To Beatrice, the heart of Greystone, and to every hand that helped unearth her truth." He spoke clearly, so the villagers might hear. "To Beatrice," they echoed in unison, glasses clinking in harmonious tribute. The final note of celebration arrived in the form of an announcement from Hastings, the unveiling of a time capsule buried beneath the labyrinth. He produced a brass box, engraved with the year 2025, and invited Lady Greystone to place within it tokens of the era. Beatrice's memoir, Caldwell's signed confession, the 3 crimson dominoes now bound together, and a sprig of the 13th petalled rose. As each item was secured, Hastings gave the capsule a final turn in the earth. "May this serve as a reminder to future generations," he said, "that secrets, when hidden, fester, but when shared with compassion and courage, they heal." A hush settled, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the soft coo of pigeons above. Then, as if on cue, children released small paper lanterns into the bright air, lanterns embossed with white rose motifs that drifted upward like glowing blooms. Poirot, his morning suit impeccably creased, stepped aside to address Lady Greystone. "Madame, your fête shines as a testament to resilience. Greystone Manor, once veiled in mystery, now stands bathed in open light." She pressed his hand. "And it is thanks to you, Hercule. You taught us that the strength of a family lies in its willingness to face truths, however uncomfortable." He inclined his head, moustaches twitching with contentment. "I trust that, should another puzzle arise, you will face it with the same courage you have shown." Arabella smiled serenely. But for now, no more puzzles for at least a fortnight. Poirot cast a sly glance at Hastings, who raised an eyebrow. "We shall see, madame. You can never be too certain of Monsieur Poirot's appetite for mystery." Laughter rippled through the gathering as the village band struck up a stately tune under the white rose arbour, now an enduring emblem of truth unmasked. The people of Greystone Manor and Millbrook danced and dined, their hearts light and their bonds unbreakable. And as the sun climbed higher, the memory of domino threats and midnight summons receded into legend, making way for a new chapter in the life of an estate forever transformed by courage, compassion, and the gentle art of revelation. Chapter 12. A Legacy of Truth. The late afternoon sun cast its warm glow across Greystone Manor's terrace as the household and villagers gathered for one final moment of reflection after the day's joyous fete. A soft breeze carried the scent of roses through the air, and the party had dwindled to a small circle of familiar faces beneath the white rose arbour. Lady Arabella Greystone, Beatrice, Edward, Margaret, Isabel, Captain Hastings, and Hercule Poirot. Even Mr. Lawrence stood nearby, leaning on his spade from the time capsule burial, his cheeks pink from exertion, yet bright with satisfaction. It was in this peaceful gathering that Poirot chose to share his concluding thoughts. "Mes amis," he began, folding his hands before him. "What a remarkable tapestry we have woven these past nights and days. Intrigue and fear, revelation and renewal, all bound by the crimson domino and the petals of a hidden rose. Yet, like any tapestry, its final threads must be knotted, and the excess cut away, so that its beauty may endure." Lady Greystone smiled, her eyes glistening. "Hercule, we have relied on your little grey cells to guide us through labyrinths of secrets. Now, what final counsel do you offer as we close the chapter on this extraordinary chapter of our lives?" Poirot glanced at Beatrice, whose silvered hair caught the sunlight, then back at the gathered faces. "First, we must remember that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, carry the power to harm when left unspoken. It was the domino, black and red, delivered in silence and provocation, that taught us this lesson. Yet we overcame fear by embracing truth. Let us honour that victory by pledging openness among ourselves." He stepped closer to the arbour's plaque and ran a finger along its engraved letters. "This arbour stands as more than a dedication to Aunt Beatrice. It signifies the family's commitment to honesty. When a burden grows too heavy, share it. When a joy blooms, celebrate it together." He looked to Edward. "You have pledged transparency in the estate's affairs. Continue that promise, for a steward's responsibility is to the people as much as to family." Edward nodded gravely. "You have my word, Monsieur Poirot. From this day forward, I will maintain open ledgers and welcome counsel from all quarters. My mother, my cousins, Miss Fanshawe, and Aunt Beatrice. The Greystone Trust shall stand as a model of integrity." Poirot turned to Margaret and Isabel, who still wore ribbons of the village fete in their hair. "For the next generation, dear Margaret and dear Isabel, remember that love and trust are the noblest legacy parents can bestow. Let no petty jealousies or unspoken fears arise between you, but rather support one another as sisters and friends." Lerida smiled and linked her arm with Isabel. "We will, monsieur. We shall be each other's confidants and pillars of strength." Poirot then addressed Lady Greystone and Beatrice. "And to you, the two bearers of the family's heart, you have taught us that courage takes many forms. Courage to admit a hidden truth, courage to forgive, and courage to rebuild what was broken. May the bond between aunt and niece remain as steadfast as this arbour's ironwork, and as fragrant as its roses in bloom." Beatrice reached for Lady Greystone's hand. "Thank you, Hercule. You have been more than an investigator. You have been a friend to our family." Captain Hastings cleared his throat and raised a glass of elderflower cordial. "And let us not forget the villagers who stood by us, the staff who kept calm supplies during midnight crises, and the memories we share now to Greystone Manor and all who cherish it." They lifted their glasses in unison, the cordial sweetness mingling with the rose fragrances. Poirot watched each face reflect the moment. Pride, relief, affection. He sipped his own glass and set it down carefully. "Before I take my leave," he said quietly, "I have one final reminiscence to share. When first presented with that ebony and crimson domino, I sensed both danger and drama. The domino game is one of strategy, of matching pairs to gain advantage. Yet your adversaries played their own game, one of secrets and intimidation. You responded not in kind, but with unity and revelation. In doing so, you broke the chain of fear and restored the bond of family." He reached into his coat pocket and produced the 3 crimson dominoes, now polished and bound together with a ribbon, of Beatrice's choosing. "These tiles shall remain in the manor's treasure chest, alongside Aunt Beatrice's journal, the codicil of 1915, and the confession signed by Mr. Caldwell. Let them serve as reminders that justice may come in quiet dominoes, in whispered riddles, or in forged parchments, but it always stands to reason, to compassion, and to truth." Poirot laid the domino bundle gently upon the arbour's ledge, where the sun would find them each morning. "May these tokens rest here, never to be played again, unless, of course, the little grey cells require a holiday." A ripple of laughter passed through the group. Hastings clapped Poirot on the back. "Well, Hercule, you certainly deserve fun after this case." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "Perhaps, but I suspect my rest will be brief." Lady Greystone stepped forward and placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. "Whenever you wish to return, whether as guest or friend, this house and these gardens shall welcome you. You have earned a permanent place in our story." Poirot's moustaches twitched in pleasure. "Madam, your hospitality is as generous as your spirit. I shall return, not merely as a detective, but as a friend of Greystone Manor." As the sun sank toward the horizon, the party dispersed. Edward escorted his aunts indoors. Margaret and Isabel lingered to pet the manor's spaniel. Mr. Lawrence closed the rose-beds and dusted his gloves. Hastings and Poirot walked side by side toward the carriage drive. The village band's distant chords drifted on the air, a gentle melody of celebration. On the carriage steps, Lady Greystone waved farewell. "Safe travels, Captain. Safe travels, Monsieur Poirot." Hastings lifted his hat. "Thank you, Lady Greystone. I plan to visit often, if only to taste more of Mrs. Dawkins's gingerbread." Poirot bowed. "And I shall write of this case, to share its lessons with colleagues and friends. Good evening, mes amis." The carriage rolled down the tree-lined drive, its wheels crunching over gravel strewn with fallen petals. Poirot and Hastings sat comfortably within, the evening air cool against the carriage's open window. Hastings peered out at the glowing arbour. "You know, Hercule, there's something poetic in leaving those dominoes behind, like setting a puzzle at rest." Poirot nodded, gazing into the distance. "Indeed, but puzzles have a way of finding us, Captain, and in their solving we find ourselves and one another. The people of Greystone have shown that courage and kindness are the true keys to any lock. He twisted his moustaches. Now, my friend, shall we discuss our next adventure? Hastings chuckled. Absolutely. But perhaps over a pint in that village inn. No midnight summons required. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Très bien. A pint. It shall be. But only if it comes with a slice of Beatrice's rose-shaped tart. One must maintain some standards after all. And so, as the carriage turned toward the road back to London, the curtain fell on the final chapter of the case of the Crimson Domino at Greyston Manor. Secrets had been unearthed. Justice had been served, and a family once divided now stood united beneath an arbour of white roses, its petals numbered not in sorrow, but in promise, each blossom a testament to a legacy of truth.